Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. I'm Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm excited for a conversation with Christina Benty. Good to have her back. She is owner of Strategic Leadership Solutions and an ALN Sole Practitioner member. So glad to have you with us today, Christina. And before we get underway, we just want to thank our patron members and our platinum member, especially Onuma Inc., as well as all our patron members. Definitive Logic, just acquired by Mantech Company. Congratulations for them. CGI, ABS Quality Evaluations, and Jacobs, as well as all our organizational members. Super grateful for their continued support of this and other programming. And if you'd like to work with us, please reach out. We really want to partner with every organization in the world, as Mike Bordenero likes to say, to deliver the most value. And with that, we just a plug for the Andrew James Advisory Group course, ALN A55K Professional Certification course, upcoming 2 courses, and lead to A55K certification. I myself am an A55K grad, and I can say it's helpful to know this stuff. So this is a very easy way to get acquainted with important and powerful structure from the ISO 55000 document. So with that, Mike Bordenero, Executive
Thanks,
Director.
Nick. Uh, Thanks, Nick. And I'm going to build on that. I loved ISO 55000, especially ISO 55001. I read it myself. You have to work to get through it. And Jim Dieter, the founder of the ALN, said, Mike, you really should take this class. And I didn't really want to, but I went to Washington, D.C. and I took it, and I get it so much better having gone through the class. And Lindsay Ziegler, who is the president of Andrew James Advisory Group and gives the course, is also the chair of the ISO 55000 US Tag Mirror Committee. And next week, she's going to be talking about what's going on with ISO 55000 and 55001 and talk about the course that is going to be coming up next in November. So please join us for that too. But we have been waiting so long to talk with Christina. We met her through the internet. It just was like, this is the right person to connect with. And when we had our first talk, it was just spectacular. Christina is twice elected as a council person, is that was the proper term, and twice elected as mayor in the city of Golden in Canada. And they very wisely have term limits. And that allowed Christina to move on. And we're so happy that you see assets and asset management and asset leadership as key as helping organizations, specifically the organizations that are called municipalities. So let's start where we always do with, how did you get where you're at in your asset management journey, Christina Benty?
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I'm excited about this conversation too. And I'm a bit of where I find myself right now is I'm a recovering politician. We actually don't have term limits, but I chose to leave office when I did. So I did, but
You're a wise politician.
Exactly. You got to know when to exit, right? So yeah, bit of a recovering politician, a social scientist, and an advocate for asset management. So, but my my whole asset management journey actually began kind of when my political journey began. I was elected to office, to council, I guess it was about 20 years ago, and elected under a narrative in the community. And it's a narrative I bought into, where I pay too many taxes, and what do I even get anyway? And this narrative of we have too much staff, and what do they even do? And decisions are made behind closed doors, and just an anti-government and anti-local government narrative. And of course, I was going to go in and fix everything. And it didn't take long for me to realize that the things I had taken for granted that they were a lot more complex than I realized, right? And this is rather normal. You know, you don't think, you turn on your water, you get clean, clear drinking water every time, and you don't think about actually, how does it make it to me? What are all of the aspects that are involved, and the complexities that are involved to ensure that I'm getting clean, clear drinking water, that I can flush my toilet and have it disappear every time, that I can put my garbage out or my recycling out, that I can that I can bike on trails and drive on roads, and that there's flowers and parks. And so all of those services that local government provides, once I realized that, hey, this is a little more complex than I realized. And the people who were carrying that narrative, it's like, they have no idea what they're talking about. So I became a real learner. How do I learn how to do my job and understand what services we provide? What level do we provide those services at? And what does it actually cost to provide those services? So when we were introduced to the concept of asset management, I would say probably in my second term, just as a concept, it seemed like a no-brainer to me. It was like, why haven't we been talking about this? Like, what's the problem? If you're an organization that provides services and you have assets that provide those services, then you have an obligation to look after the assets that provide services in a structured, systematic, and long-term thinking way, right? So it was really, it seemed, like I said, it was like, why haven't we been doing this? And it seemed so obvious to me. So fast forward again, when I was mayor, I had some excellent staff that they were digesting their understanding of asset management, and they actually they got us involved in a pilot project, and it in asset management. So we were involved with NAMS Canada, and what we discovered through doing that pilot project.
National Association of Municipal, what's the S?
National Asset Management Strategy.
Society?
Yeah, society. That's probably it.
NAMS. Okay.
Yeah. And what they helped us really they helped us grapple with that reality. And what we discovered as a municipality is that we were cash poor and asset rich. We had lots of assets and not a lot of cash, and no real strategic plan, strategic thinking to ensure that we were looking after the assets with that long-term lens, that view. So again, it was a real eye-opener. And so for me, particularly as mayor, I took it upon myself to start getting out into the community and talk about this, and talk about the fact that we needed a narrative shift in our community, and we needed to have better conversations about all of the services that we have taken for granted, and how do we ensure that future generations are not saddled with bad decisions that we were potentially going to make if we didn't have the right conversation. So that also led me into a journey of doing my master's in leadership. So I have an academic background in leadership and systems theory and complexity science, and that really solidified my learning as an asset management advocate. And I end up doing my master's thesis on asset management and community engagement. And I got to use my community as a living laboratory to gather data on what does my community understand about the assets and services, and what can I do to shift that narrative around. So I would say that's still the preliminary part of my asset management journey. It's okay if I keep talking?
Yeah, where are you now is the question. So what are you doing with all of this now? That's phenomenal background.
So I left office intentionally. Like I said, I chose to leave when wanted to leave on a high note, and I also I still loved local government and wanted to help those that were still involved in local government to avoid some of the pitfalls that I thought that we had found ourselves in. And so I took my research finding, my lived experience, and my academic background, and I started a leadership consulting firm focused on leadership development, team development, governance training, asset management, policy development. And so I work with elected officials and senior management teams across the country, helping them grapple with their asset management journey, but also help them develop their leadership muscles. Because this is the thing that I'm observing in my work right now, is that we're getting a handle on the technical aspects of asset management. Like, we have a better understanding around, okay, what's asset management? You know, what are the assets that you own? Where are they? What are they worth? What do we need to replace them? How do we, making sure that we have a financial plan to ensure that we're replacing those assets at the rate that they're wearing out. But what I am noticing is that what people are really wrestling with is they are wrestling with, in that place of discomfort, it's like, how do I make those brave, bold decisions? And how do I tell my community the truth? And so some of my work in working with leaders is helping them develop their leadership muscles so that they can hold space for some of those brave, bold conversations, and hold the space for very uncomfortable conversations. The senior management teams, I noticed, are really struggling with providing fearless advice to their elected officials and allowing the politicians to again wrestle with that complexity and then tell their community, hey, you know what? We've underinvested in our assets. And if we're going to continue to provide services to our residents now and into the future, then we need to have we need to talk about expectation management. We need to talk about what those services and service levels are, and what does it cost to provide, and what are the decisions that we need to make to ensure that we're not saddling future generations with, like I said, that poor decision making.
Christina, love this conversation, and I can see what you're talking about potentially in my own community, and I wonder potentially, again, from the position of my elected official, my mayor here, what could we say to him to help him be brave instead of maybe doing what he feels like predecessors have always done, which is kind of keep quiet on the really tough stuff and just pass that burden on, to some degree, do the best you can, whatever that means. But how do we get them to be brave in the face of an election cycle? Or
I think it really comes back to stepping back and going, why does local government exist in the first place? And local government exists to provide services, right? And in some ways, it's a contractual relationship with your community and with your residents and businesses. It's the local government provides services, and there's a cost to provide those services. And I think asking your elected officials, do you have the information and data to be able to articulate what it costs to provide this level of service? Have you defined your service levels? Have you defined them at a customer level? What services do you provide, and do you have that defined customer level of service? A lot of local governments are, like I said, they're working on the technical aspects of that service definition, but not necessarily that customer level of service definition. So asking them, do you have a customer level of service definition, and is there a cost associated with that? so that what it does is it takes some of the emotion out of the information. And then once you've got that data and information, what are the decisions that you as elected officials are making to ensure that you're protecting the assets so that my kids and your kids get to enjoy them as well? Like, it's funny because I think about it. I know one thing. If I was running for mayor now, I'd be way less measured than I was when I ran for office. And I think one of the questions that I would be asking my community is, how important is water and sewer and roads and garbage and pickup and recycling pickup and trails and recreation? And asking my community, how important are those things to you? And then saying, my job as your elected official is to ensure that the services you enjoy today, that future generations get to enjoy them at the same level, at least, if not better. And
I'd vote for you.
What's that? You'd vote for me?
I'd vote for you. So Nick, if I get messed up with my internet, you just jump in and start taking questions. So what have you been seeing, Christina, with the people that you're working with? What's the same at the organizations? And maybe provide something that's different or an example of something that you're helping with right now.
So one of the things that I'm focusing on right now is actually building internal capacity in the organization. So when I'm asked to go in to do some work, I have a tendency to try to bring the system in the room and make sure that everybody understands what the organization is grappling with. I'll give you an example. I did some strategic planning in a community not that long ago. And so one of the things I insisted on is that we do a systems-wide workshop. And it was a relatively small community, but bringing as many people into the room as possible and asking, because the people that deal with the assets every day, they have a lot of information about the assets, and they seldom get asked what the state of the assets are. And so what I did is a systems-wide workshop where we sat down and said, what's working well in the organization and what needs some attention? And then ask the question, what, if ignored, is going to put this community at risk in the next 3 to 5 years? And you get some very juicy and interesting information from the folks that are seldom asked that question that is so useful to the decision-making body. And then inviting them to sit with that discomfort. Yeah, this is not easy. And to sit, this is uncomfortable. And to sit with that discomfort and figure out, how are we going to, again, shift the internal narrative to start with before we shift the external narrative? And then go out to the community and have conversations. How important are these services to you? Here's what it costs to provide these services. So it's holding space for brave conversations around expectation management and recognizing that people's anxiety levels sometimes get a little high. It's much easier to talk about where a sign is located than it is, that we need X number of millions of dollars worth of infrastructure investment just in our roads in the next year. And so I think contextual intelligence is really key. So for example, my community is grappling with this right now because we're in our community, we're talking about building an indoor pool. Now, again, the elected officials, when they're speaking to the community, need to go to the community and say, let's put this in context. We have $48 million worth of road rehabilitation that has to be done the next few years. We need a new town hall. We've got assets that are starting to age out that we either we're going to divest ourselves of, which we can, or if we renew those assets, what is that going to cost, particularly in the current environment? And what are not just the capital costs, but the operational costs? Because as you know, capital costs are about 20% and operations and maintenance costs about 80%. So making sure that folks have the right level of understanding so that they're engaging in the conversation appropriately and constantly bringing them back to the place of discomfort, and recognize that it is uncomfortable to grapple with millions and millions of dollars of underinvestment because previous elected officials have either ignored or they have gone with this anti-tax narrative. And an anti-tax narrative is an anti-service narrative, especially in local governments.
Christina, I think the context point is so key. You know, you want to make sure people, as they're being made aware of maybe the dire state things are in, or just a state of disrepair, that they know, you know, what that's, compare that to the road, compare that to other cities, compare that to our budget, or, you know, the sort of taxes we're expecting next year, or, you know, just help people get the full picture so that, you know, maybe they can see how, like, I'm in my head, I'm picturing a person that just hears a number in one of these community discussions. Like, you know, my visual mind wants to see a pie chart and see, you know, what it would look like if we were allocating resources slightly differently. Or, you know, I just think of the power of the visuals and how that's tied into expectation management and data transparency, just because it's a big thing that our other projects with the ALN are looking into right now. Mike, just thinking of the AI storms we've been running, and how much the visual, the picture is helpful for changing narratives, like you were saying, is such a key starting place.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my sayings with communication is no one thing works, but everything works when you work it. And making sure that you're appealing to a number of learners, and that and disseminating information or having conversations in a variety of different ways. And so images, information, hosting conversations, community conversations. One of the things I did recently in a small community is I went in and did some service level reviews. And so one of the things we did is just list, here's all the services that are essential to your quality of life. And here's all the services that contribute to your, to your well-being and quality of life. And so we did that on a one pager and made it attractive, and then also did a second page where here are all the assets that our crews look after to provide those services. So even things like we had the kilometers, our crews look after X kilometers of road. Our crews look after X kilometers of trails. Our crews look after this many, the water treatment plant, and all these sorts of assets. And you can have images, and you can tell stories about that again help solidify in people's understanding. Oh yeah, these are all things that are beyond my purview and I don't think about. It's kind of like, electricity. Like when you have a power outage, you're suddenly, oh my gosh, you have a power outage. And then it comes back on. You're like, oh, thank goodness the power came back on. And then within a minute, you forget that you rely on power, right? So there's so many things that are beyond our purview that we don't think about in a thoughtful way. And basically, I don't expect citizens to in some ways. However, elected officials need to consider that all of these assets and services require stewardship and require a stewardship responsibility to ensure, again, that these are looked after in a sustainable way. And every decision you make as an elected official is a move towards sustainability or away from sustainability. And so measuring that decision, is this a decision that is moving us towards long-term sustainability, or is it moving us away from long-term sustainability?
Christina, I don't know if you saw in the chat, it strikes me as similar to this discussion a little bit, a question from Andre, which was to what degree to educate council and about asset management and their role as decision makers, and more specifically, how much detail is appropriate to provide decision makers?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
I mean, I'm just listening to you talk and like, I think some decision makers would say, too much information. I don't want to feel as much responsibility for the state of our assets as you're putting on me right now, but maybe they need to hear that. And it's a really interesting thing that you keep bringing up of this kind of discomfort, an uncomfortable place that is in truth telling, that there is discomfort, and then we have to figure out how to move forward.
So this comes back to what I said earlier, that is the job of staff, is to provide fearless advice, right? And but what I notice is that staff often bury the elected officials in data and information that sometimes isn't relevant to them and doesn't lead to good decisions. And so that is that's part of organizational maturity, is to figure out what is the right level of information that our elected officials need to understand. Are we building their asset management cognizance right out of the gate? And are we doing it in a way that's helping them shape a different narrative? I will often, and believe it or not, this is actually quite effective, even just right after an election. Take folks on a tour, to have them tour some of the facilities and the assets, and have the frontline staff brag about what they do. And then talk about the assets that are providing these services, just to raise that level of organizational cognizance. I would also, on every staff report, there should be, and I mean, these are the staff reports that I'm familiar with, is what are the administrative implications, the strategic implications, the financial implications. Climate adaptation is now, part of that filter. Does your staff report include, and these are the asset management implications. So making sure that you're painting the picture and telling the story the best way you can. So I'll give another example. I worked in a community where, again, tiny community, but they should have been spending $500,000 on road rehabilitation a year. They were spending $80,000 a year on road rehabilitation. And so what are the long-term consequences of that? And outlining, if we continue to ignore this is what our assets are going to look like, and paint that picture and use whatever storytelling and modality that you can use to ensure that you have both the data and the information about the state of the assets, and that you're also telling the story about, and this is what it's going to look like. And there's tons of images out there to outline how, if we ignore this is what the risk is going to be. But one thing I would say to the staff is that you should not be bearing the risk that the elected officials bear. That's actually what they're elected to do. Their job as elected officials is to, in the simplest, now this is simple, but it's not easy. Their job is to represent the public on what are the services that our community wants and needs now and into the future, and what are we willing and able to pay for. And the job of staff is to provide them with that data and information so that they can make those decisions. Now, those two questions sound super, like I said, those are two easy questions, but I often tell elected officials, I guarantee you will leave your community in a better position if you keep these two questions in front of every decision you make.
Wow. So Nick, this is too good to end. We've got you. We're going to keep going. But Nick, will you give us an official, thanks? And if anyone has to leave because they've only allocated an hour or a half hour, then they're covered. But their leadership muscles. I want to talk about your school, the things you mentioned about what you learned at school.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much, Christina Benty, for your time today. And we are looking forward to talking a little more in just a moment here. But did want to thank our Platinum organizational member, Onuma Inc., as well as our patron organizational members and all of our members who help make this programming and our newsletter and other programs possible. So again, please reach out if you're interested in working with us. We really would like to partner with everyone in the world. So there's room for you at the table. And one more plug for the Andrew James Advisory Group upcoming course on the ISO 55000 asset management structure. You've heard good information about it from Mike and myself, but you will hear more next Thursday at 3 from Lindsay Ziegler, president of the Andrew James Advisory Group. And with that, back to Christina Benty and Mike.
Okay, so we've got a couple questions. Why don't we get to some of those? What about alternative financing mechanisms other than taxes? That's a leadership muscle that needs to be exercised, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I know, that's a struggle for local governments because the constraints, your only source of revenue is taxes. Guaranteed revenue is taxes, property taxes, but also fees and charges, and then grants. And I know that some local governments explore other alternative methods, but I think that personally, I think that there should be a better conversation with other levels of government on the fact that local government needs better tools to be able to provide the services that they do. Because, and again, I'm speaking from my Canadian lens here, but one of the things that I tell folks is that for every tax dollar you pay, 8 cents goes to the local government. Every tax dollar that you pay, 8 cents goes to the local government. 42 cents goes to the province and 50 cents go to the feds. However, local governments own 65% of the infrastructure that provides services, and you rely on your local government services 24 hours a day. Like if the federal government disappeared, it could take months before you'd know. But if local government disappeared, you would know the second you went to the washroom and tried to flush your toilet or get some water. And so again, this goes back to actually narrative shifts and better conversations. And so it's a co-created conversation. It's not just the responsibility of the local government, but it's the responsibility of citizens to have a better relationship and see themselves as co-creators of a system, and to have better conversations with other levels of government around sustainability, because the whole lack of the lack of sustainable funding for local governments outside of taxes is incredibly problematic for the future of our countries, I would say, because local government is the lifeblood. If you don't have all of those assets and services, these are economic development tools. They not only contribute to people's life, it's economic development. Like, I will engage sometimes the Chamber of Commerce because with the Chamber of Commerce and say, listen, you're poking at the local government. Where you should be poking is at other levels of government, because economic development is deeply connected to the assets and services that are provided. And so again, it's a reframe. It is a reframe of how we've traditionally thought about our assets and services.
Andre has added more on the subject. I'll just add it here. Should we as a public institutions place a priority or even have a duty to educate the public on make asset management a topic that's more familiar, even as familiar as the currency? And because conceivably that could make some of these these hard conversations easier. You know, how idealistic is that?
So, interestingly enough, last year when we had in British Columbia, where I live, we had municipal elections throughout BC. And one of the things that I did was do pre-election workshops, so travel around to communities across BC and essentially set the table for folks to understand. And part of the marketing strategy that I used was that, you know, are you interested in becoming an elected official? Then you should educate yourself before you get involved. But if you're a citizen and you plan to vote, then you need to intelligently approach your voting and vote intelligently. And so it was an invitation for both those interested in local government, but also those who were interested as citizens. And like I said, I'm way less measured now than I ever used to be, and letting folks have a better understanding about here's all of the services that are provided in a very cost-effective way. One of the things I would ask my community is how much do you pay on telecommunications? Do the math. I think
So,
local
Andre,
government needs to do a better job of bragging about the services it does provide so that there's a better contextualized conversation.
was that provincially funded? Andre wants to know that initiative.
No, that wasn't. I did approach a provincial organization about funding that, but it was out of their mandate. So it was actually local governments themselves that hired me to come and do those community-wide workshops. And I provided them with the marketing material, and they got that information out. But in one area where there was a number of little communities, like we had 60 people in the room. And when you touch even 60 people, they go out and tell their friends. Now, I want to say one other thing, though, about that is it's actually really important to, this is why building your internal capacity, don't underestimate the value of your frontline staff. And again, those and arming them with good information, because we can still shift it through conversations. Arming your elected officials, arming your frontline staff to have better conversations with their with the people in their lives, particularly in small communities.
So Chris Silkey just made a comment and reminded me that Chris is the person who introduced us to you. I thought it was just an internet thing, but I think Chris saw something that you wrote on the internet, sent it to us, and then we said, oh, we've got to talk to her, and you're 10 times better than we ever imagined. So people are like listing things that we should be doing. And believe me, we are going to try to figure out how to get this out. And I'm thinking, you know, maybe just a report on what you did. You know, us hearing about that is great, but if the ALN can put it into a paper, this is what was done, then others might think, hey, we can do this also.
Yeah.
I really like the last thing you were talking about focusing on the frontline staff and not underestimating the power that can have in changing a citywide narrative. And even a few small community engagement things could really shift the tide in a small town. And bragging, man, such good little tidbits there. I'd love to implement in my hometown here.
So, what you're talking about is very, directly applicable to municipalities, but there's parts that are applicable to all organizations. So what kind of leadership muscle training applies to all leaders?
That's a really good question, and it feels like that would be another whole seminar. So, like, I will say this, and this was one of the things again that I learned as an elected official, and that I wish I had a better understanding of, and like when I first started out as an elected official, and that is really being able to stay in the room and hold the space for uncomfortable conversations, and to build curiosity rather than certainty. And because oftentimes elected officials are sure that staff is wasting money, and the community is sure that the local government's wasting money, and holding space for curiosity and understanding that people get activated when they start talking about taxes. But if you can ask them better questions, and you can manage your own nervous system and calm it down and build an environment where it's safe for people to be uncomfortable and to figure out how we're going to do this. The other thing that I actually wanted to say that I think is really important, and this belongs to everybody, we need to start cultivating gratitude campaigns, and come from a place of wonder. All of these assets and services that we have are all because, like, think about what life was like 100 years ago, where you had to get your own water and you had to go out to the outhouse, and you didn't have the conveniences, and we forget that all of these assets and services provide a quality of life that again we have a stewardship responsibility towards. Sometimes when I end my asset management workshops, I will say asset management is actually about love. we care for the things that we love, and I have seen, I've traveled up in the Yukon and the Northwest Territories, and I've worked with them. Sometimes I'll have grown men bragging about their community, and they're crying, and it's like they love their community. They're sitting on council, and they're there because they want to, like, they love their community. And so I remind them, channel that love by looking after the assets and services that you get to enjoy now, and make sure that future generations get to experience them as well. It's multi-generational thinking, and it's all about love.
Oh, thank you so much on so many levels. And yes, where to go? I think where we're going is our next 10 years. This is our 10th year anniversary, and you have just energized us for the next 10 years, I think. Everything you're saying is great. Storyline, narrative. Oh, we need to be saying that all the time. And so what did you get out of your education that's leading to all this energy and clear, focused thoughts?
Oh, my education was in leadership was actually one of those. The motto of the school that I went to Royal Roads University, was question everything, especially yourself. And I went through my own internal dismantling, and remantling. And I'm a big believer of leading from the inside out. And so part of my work with leaders is helping them lead from the inside out, and again learn to develop their leadership muscles so that they can host those brave, bold conversations amongst themselves, and then bring that out into the community. We're facing a polycrisis in many ways, right? In Canada here, housing crisis, infrastructure deficit, we've got climate challenges, and there was lots and lots of forest fires here around BC, very, very challenging. We've got an opioid crisis, a healthcare crisis. Our systems are collapsing in many ways. where, I've had so many flights canceled recently because there wasn't enough people working in the Vancouver traffic control. And so the systems that we have relied on are being stretched to the max, and it feels very much like we're at a bit of a I don't know, a crisis point. And so leaders, people that are willing to step up to the table, to the plate, and really speak to the truth and speak to bravely and boldly, and to be able to navigate those unknown waters that we're all facing. That is I think the biggest challenge. I recently did a workshop on anti-fragile leadership, and how do you build anti-fragility into your leadership voluntarily, so that when things involuntarily happen to you, when things come at you, that you have the presence of mind, you have a calm, grounded, non-anxious presence to be able to deal with the challenges that all of us are going to face. Like when someone used to come up to me and they'd be barking at me when I was mayor, I would get so rattled. And now I have learned to be much more anti-fragile and grounded. And I'm okay with people's emotions. I can hold the space for some of the challenges that folks face, just because I've been building my own internal leadership muscles. So that it's still an inside-outside job, even though it's asset management. It's actually it's asset management of a different kind.
I actually use ISO 55001 to help people with their personal problems. I'm too much of a geek, but it works. Okay, what's the mission?
Yeah.
Who are the stakeholders? If it's just you, okay, this isn't anybody else. But if you need to involve other people, what are you starting to do? And how are you going to continually improve? So I geek out, but yes, there is personal management that's part of this. You get to decide whatever program you want to do. We want more of Christina Benty.
Can I say one more thing here?
Please.
One of the other mission that I'm on is to actually make asset management fun and interesting. And so I've actually written 2 songs about asset management. And one of them is to the tune of Taking Care of Business. And I will, when I'm doing an in-person workshop, I'll get people to stand up and I'll be like, how brave can you be right now? And I know I've got a room full of engineers and finance folks. And I'm like, okay, we're going to get uncomfortable. And I get them to stand up and I get them to clap and to move. and I do my little song. And it's so funny because the song actually solidify. They're like, they remember the song because it was something different, right? I know sometimes I can be a talking head, but sometimes when you can make it fun and interesting and actually captivate that and ground that experience, it's like, look at that.
Can you hum a few bars?
Absolutely.
Please
I know
do.
you think it's boring, but the numbers are soaring. The deficit ain't going away. You think you're getting hosed because you still drive on the roads, but you're gonna have to fix them someday. Start taking care of business every day.
Awesome. Our first song. Excellent. Excellent. So, Nick, do you have any final question?
Oh, I was just thinking back to your question about a leadership muscle applicable not just to municipalities, and I think it is the main one I think that's been hit on of being able to do that uncomfortable, bravery maybe is that leadership muscle that is applicable to everyone, because there's just going to be uncomfortable conversations in any organization or relationship, and avoidance is not a lasting solution if we've learned anything.
Well, we had been looking forward to this, and we were right to be looking forward to this. We can go on in so many different directions. My mind is spinning for workshops and in-person activities, but we'll take things one step at a time. It's got to align with what you're doing. We don't want to put anything additional on top of you. So we'll talk, and everybody out there will bring Christina back in some way.
Yeah, thank you for the kind comments in the chat. It's a pleasure to it's a pleasure to meet you all, and I hope we get to meet in some person someday. So
yes, we'll work to make that happen.
Excellent.
Oh, thank you, Christina. Thank you, Nick. Thanks to everyone in the audience for the active engagement, and we'll see Christina again soon, and we'll see you all next week.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Oh, that was great.